right, what is up, Notre Dame fans? I am here at M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore, Maryland, where the Notre Dame Fighting Irish were up really big on Navy for a stretch in this game, and it looked like it was going to be a blowout win, and it looked like they were continuing all the things that they did against Clemson, well, really adding on to that with the passing game, because it wasn't the Notre Dame running game that got the Irish out to a 35-13 halftime lead. It was the passing game with Drew Pine throwing for 4 scores, running for another in that first half. I mean, he was on fire. He couldn't do any wrong. And then in the second half, he couldn't do any right. And I don't think that was necessarily all his fault. Navy said, hey, if this guy's going to sling it around the yard on us and go 14 of 16 and complete these easy throws, because they were relatively easy throws that he was making. There were some difficult ones. The touchdown to Jaden Thomas was a really nice throw. He made a nice throw to Deion Colsey a couple times, a couple chain movers to Deion Colsey. But in the second half, Navy just said, hey, we're going to take away your passing game. We're going to come at you with the zero blitz, cover zero, and either you're going to get the ball out really quickly or you're going to take a sack. Well, it was the latter for Notre Dame in taking 5 sacks. Patrick, how did this happen? I know you were watching from the couch in South Bend, and it was a little easier for me to see, but I mean, it didn't matter where you were watching this. Saw a whole lot going wrong with the Notre Dame offense in the second half.
Yeah, between the obvious issues with just blitz pickup, recognition, feel of blitz, and obviously be remiss not to say like lack of any counter to it from Notre Dame's coaching staff. And then, there's not much to speak of on the ground where if you think, oh, counter, let's just run it. Well, they didn't run it particularly well when they did try. I counted up the numbers, so this isn't official, and I hadn't got a chance to double check yet, but I believe it was 8 running back carries for 13 yards in the second half. So not a whole lot there either. And there's your recipe for clinging to a win where you were up by, 22 at halftime, and your recipe for winning a game where you collapsed. It doesn't happen a whole lot. And, for it to happen, you've got to have that really good first half. But for it also to happen, you need to have either something that just goes terribly wrong or something happen that you don't really have a plan for. And for Notre Dame, the latter was just not really having any way to counter or to beat even initially with what they had called those zero blitzes and those the pressure that they put on Pine there. And then the crazy part is like, you didn't think that was going to be an issue until it really started to pile up there, because it was Notre Dame's first touchdown. It was the pass to Estime on a zero blitz, where you get an advantageous matchup as part of it. Defensive lineman on Audric Estime, easy matchup for Estime to win when you just dust that guy in a little angle route, and there he walks in untouched. So in that regard, just a little surprising that it was this much of just a mess, really, is what it was in picking up and trying to beat and just not having an encounter to those blitzes in the second half.
You do a really good job with your rewatch every single week. So tomorrow, I'm sure you're going to spend a lot of time looking at what the heck happened when Notre Dame was facing a cover zero blitz in the second half, because I'm with you, Patrick. I was sitting up here in the press box just watching, and I was saying, where is the check down? Where is that little leaky route that Audric Estime ran on the touchdown? Well, really all he does is just kind of get out into a spot in the middle of the field, catch it from Drew Pine. And like you said, at that point, he can outrun a defensive lineman or whoever it was on him. There was none of that. There were no screens or anything. It was just nothing. There was nothing going there for the Notre Dame offense. And I think at one point they had run 18 plays and only had 6 yards. I mean, it was 3-and-out city for Notre Dame. And it came up in the post-game press conference, and I think it's a pretty good point that there was a 10-minute drive for Navy to start that second half. And I know it only ends up with 3 points, and you tweeted it, Patrick, and I was in total agreement with you at the time. When you're trailing by 22 and you go on a 10-minute drive and you only get 3 points out of it, not a recipe for a comeback. But for some reason, maybe it took Notre Dame out of its game. There was a penalty on DJ Brown on that drive on 4th and 1. He had a little tug over the middle of the field. Marcus Freeman said it in the post-game press conference. He said, man, if that never gets called, and maybe it probably should have got called. I think he had a little bit of the jersey there. But if that doesn't get called, maybe it's a different game. Maybe Notre Dame comes out on offense and looks like it did in that first half. But instead, they get the ball with 5 minutes remaining in the third quarter. They're kind of backed up. I think Chris Tyree was bottled up near the 15 or 17-yard line, and they go 3-and-out. And then all of a sudden you're kicking back to Navy, and you're like, well, man, if they score again, all of a sudden we're staring at a one-score game, and it just I don't know. Is that the way it felt to you, Patrick, when you were watching at home? That 10-minute drive that Navy sustained, even though it only put 3 points, it kind of changed the complexion of the game because at that point I think you knew, okay, Notre Dame was thinking there's only 20 minutes left in this game. Let's just get this thing to the house, and it turned out they barely got it to the house and won by 3 points.
Yeah, it's like you're not running to the finish line. You're literally
Yeah,
crawling at it, and you just barely got the hand on there
yeah,
before Navy could. I think of
yeah.
the final scene from
Talladega Nights.
Oh yeah, Nights. Yeah, exactly. Where you're
Yeah.
like you
Okay, the
just
car's
barely,
crashed, but
yeah,
you still got to get to the line somehow.
yep.
Exactly. That's what it
And
was.
hey, it's look. I don't want to lean too far into this, but it does kind of take some skill to get a crash car to the finish line. And I think for that, you have to credit special teams and Notre
Yep.
Dame's defense there, where Navy began its final 3 drives inside the 15. So for a team that doesn't like to pass and a team that needs to mount long drives, like you make it go a long way, which is for the team that's ahead, what you want to do when you're trying to keep them from coming behind and
Yep.
coming from behind. And then defense, like, and you look at Navy's 6.2 yards per play, I think it was, and that's way above what they've been averaging. And you saw some of the drives in the first half there too of 75 yards, where some problems with that fullback dive. And even
Mm-hmm.
on that long drive in the second half, a few times where they kind of overran some of the pitches and let them get some space on the
Yep.
edge there. But then you go 3-and-out and force Navy to go 3-and-out on the next 4. And that's kind of really what made Notre Dame able to survive those disastrous offensive possessions against the blitz there, where you get
Yep.
Navy buried back pretty far and they can't go anywhere, and then you get it back at midfield, and even if you do nothing, you can still pin them back there. And then after the one time Navy scored, that short kick they tried still fails and gets Notre Dame up at midfield, where worst case was they don't do anything and they punt it back, which obviously is what happened. But at least you're able there to make them start at the 12 as opposed to the 30 something yard line, where you have to chew off a little less clock and you just require less plays to get down there. So I think a good job, we talk about just lack of adjustments from Notre Dame's offense, a good job by Notre Dame's defense to handle that fullback dive after the initial big plays that were there. And then we harped on red zone problems for so long on defense. A good job on getting that end of that 16 play drive to end in a field goal, where the play I think of is Xavier Watts kind of shooting halfway across the field
Yeah.
and that I think it was a pitch or a quarterback keep, I can't remember which, on first down. I think it was for a loss, but either way, you end up getting that and another play for no gain to 3rd and goal at the 9, and then you're at an obvious passing spot where if you're Notre Dame against Navy, you feel pretty good.
Yeah, there were some really good individual defensive plays, I guess, strung together by some players. Xavier Watts had one of those. I thought Prince Colley, I mean, when has Notre Dame ever relied this heavily on Prince Colley? I would like to see the snap count after this. It seemed like he was out there for every single play, and he played pretty well. Jack Kaiser did a really good job at linebacker without J.D. Bertrand being able to play because of a groin injury. So defensively, you see the 32 points, but it was another one of those games like early in the year where you're saying, okay, 32 points, but they still did some decent things. Patrick, you have the numbers in front of you. How many total yards did Navy end up having? I know it was more than Notre Dame because of that second half, but I can't read that there. The phone's too far away. But, I mean, you live with 363 total yards against most of the teams that you play. It's probably over Navy's average for the year or maybe right around it or under it. I'm not sure, but you live with that. And I think Notre Dame lives with that because ultimately, like Drew Pine said after the game, they still won. I mean, they still hung 35 points on this team in the first half. You got to find a way to figure out a cover zero blitz because I think you score a couple touchdowns in that second half. Navy isn't going for 2 at the end of the game in a hurry up offense and trying to score. You probably win this thing, I don't know, 45 to 20, something like that. It's a comfortable win if you figure out your offense. But I guess we'll just take it there to wrap up, Patrick. How are you feeling about this Notre Dame team after collapsing is the word that you used? I think I've heard it around the press box. I've seen it online. It was a collapse. What does this mean moving forward? Because I was sitting there in that post-game press conference and I was hearing some of the same stuff after the loss to Stanford and Marshall, and that we got to figure out why we didn't finish. And this team needs to learn how to finish. And we have to learn a lesson from this. That's what Marcus Freeman said about the Stanford and the Marshall losses, right? It was, hey, let's learn a lesson from this and be better from it. This kind of feels like one of those wins where you're saying some of the same things. What does that mean for these guys going forward?
Yeah, we heard about Marcus Freeman talk this last week of keeping that same edge that you might have after a loss because it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth after a big win like Clemson. And to start, it seemed like they certainly did. And, maybe it was just oversights of not playing for a certain thing or just not being able to finish in a game, whatever that takes. But if nothing else, I think a win that plays out in the way that this did still kind of leaves you with like a really sour taste just because it ended like this. I don't think it would be quite that way if you started really poorly and then just completely turned it on in the second half. So if nothing else, it'll be pretty easy, I think, for Notre Dame to say like, yeah, we got a lot of stuff to figure out here, even if on the whole it's not quite as disastrous as certainly losing to Marshall just in terms of like amount of stuff that went wrong. But I don't think Notre Dame players and coaches are going to have too hard of a time like focusing on that and realizing like, all right, this like there still has to be that same urgency that you get after a loss here, even though the result was not a loss. So curious to see in that sense, like how they approach that this week and what we see it look like next week against Boston College at home. Not a particularly good opponent, but one you can't really think that way if you're Notre Dame, given how some of those have gone, and just in that you're looking at a game film that's going to have a pretty bad second half that you want to figure out how to eliminate, just because you're not going to have too many games where you can survive that. And as much as it's a credit for that good initial plan, and there's going to be some good things that Notre Dame can take from that, especially in the pass game. Still something that like, yeah, I think the phrase disappointing win is kind of overused in college football and especially among fans, just given the emotional nature of this sport. But I can understand how it might apply here and can understand how it might put that like, dissatisfied mindset into the players and coaches wanting to just really feel like you have something to put behind you, even though you got the end result that you needed.
Yeah, and I'll wrap this up by saying Notre Dame and everybody that's playing college football at this stage in the season is at a point where the only thing that matters is winning because you've got two regular season games left. So, how much can you theoretically get better and better and better from this? Has Notre Dame played its best ball of the season? I'm not sure. Maybe it doesn't get better than what it did against Clemson, but they won that game. They won this game. They've got two more tries to get regular season wins before a bowl game. So at the end of the day, you've only got 3 games left. You just won this one. All you can do is try to go win the next one, beat USC in Los Angeles, and then see where you're going to a bowl game. So that was kind of my takeaway. I think the UNLV game was more of a disappointing win, if that's what the terminology some people want to use, than this one, because at the end of the day, you're a couple wins removed from that UNLV game. You got another win here today against a weird opponent at a neutral site. Now you're returning home to play an even worse opponent, and I expect Notre Dame to play well in that game. So the sky is not falling. Yes, they collapsed in the second half, but they played so well in the first half that ultimately it did not matter. We will see what these guys do next week. For Tyler Horka at M&T Bank Stadium, that's Patrick Engel. We are blueandgold.com, and we'll catch you next time.